So, how do we encounter Jesus in this passage? Well, he is approachable. He is faithful, committed to those who are his. He is generous, offering his life to all who will receive. He is hospitable. His invitation is open, and his only condition is that we believe. He is life giving, being more committed to providing for our spiritual nourishment and sustenance than he is just providing for our short term satisfaction and desires, even when those desires are good and legitimate things. The book of Hebrews says that it is good for the heart to be strengthened by grace. And Jesus' grace is the most satisfying meal we will ever eat. He is the solution to our deepest longing, a need that cannot be met through anything this world has to offer. And even the best that this world has to offer are just shadows of the goodness that God has for us in Christ. But there is a tension in this passage because we do still long. We do still long for legitimate and good things. We are able to see some fulfillment of these things on this side of eternity, but not the full fulfillment of them. We still long for things like peace. We still long for things like justice or healing or reconciliation or restoration. We still long to know the full satisfaction of Christ. We still long to be fully free of the temptation of sin. There are so many ways that we still long. We long for love. We long to know and be known by another. We long for belonging and fellowship with one another. And these are good things. And in Christ, we have begun to realize some of these things. But the greater fulfillment of them is still yet to come. And so much of what Christ holds out to us is a bit of a deferred hope, a delayed fulfillment. And so while Jesus has satisfied and solved our greatest problem and is providing for our deepest spiritual longings, we still have desires here and now that go unfulfilled. So, what are we to do in the meantime while we wait for the ultimate fulfillment of all things in Christ? And I believe that the answer is that number one, we believe. We believe that he is the satisfaction of our greatest need, our greatest desires. We also receive. We receive the life and the truth and the hope that he holds out to us. We bring our longing and our hunger to Christ. The Israelites had legitimate longing for food in the desert. They had a legitimate desire. To desire to eat is a good thing. To be satisfied with good food is a good thing. They were coming out of the land of their slavery, but they were not yet in the promised land. They'd left what they'd known, which was hard, but the unknown of the middle in the moment seemed so much harder. So much so that they preferred, we said, to return to the land of their slavery where at least they had pots of meat to eat. But the thing is that God had something greater for them on the other side of their struggle. And the same is true for us. Jesus does not eradicate all of our longings. He does not eradicate all of our desires, even the good ones. Some of our longings and desires will go unfulfilled on this side of eternity. Even Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane on the precipice of his arrest and crucifixion. And his longing went unfulfilled in the short term. He prayed in the garden that if there were any other way for God to be reconciled to man, for his work to be fulfilled other than the cup of judgment that was coming for him, that he was going to drink down in its full. If there was any other way, that God would provide another way. And yet he says, your will be done, not mine. And that was a longing that was not satisfied, not in the short term anyway. Instead, God provided for a more spiritual fulfillment for us through Christ by denying Christ's desire in that moment. We also lament. In our suffering, we are tempted to believe that God does not know, God does not care, or God cannot do anything about what we are going through. And this is exactly what the Israelites believed in the wilderness. Rather than allowing lament to turn us inward on ourselves and away from God, lament is meant to turn us to God in our suffering. It invites us to honestly express and engage with the brokenness and the loss and the suffering that we are experiencing while still acknowledging our need for God and His goodness. And it puts us in position to receive comfort and care from God in the midst of our pain. A lament typically has 3 parts. The first is it describes your current suffering. The second is that it asks God for help. And the third is that it remembers God's past faithfulness. And this lament, this kind of lament, is meant to continue to ground us in reality while also tethering us to a God that transcends our circumstances and that is faithful regardless of what our circumstances want to tempt us to believe. We also come. We come to Him. We come to the table. And so when I think about coming to the table, when I think about the invitation to come and to feast on Him, I think about communion. I think about how often I am coming defeated by the weak, weary, by my sin, weary by the suffering of the world, frustrated with the brokenness that surrounds me, just ready for Jesus. And in coming to the table, I come empty-handed. I come with my hands open in a posture that is only to receive. I'm bringing nothing to the table but my empty hands, hungry and ready to be filled once again. And then I eat of the meal that I could not make. And then we worship. We worship the God who has promised to sustain us and in Christ has given us the satisfaction, the provision of our greatest spiritual need. And then ultimately we wait and we anticipate, we wait for His return, when He will raise us up and all of our longings will find their full and final satisfaction in Him. So this is what we have in Christ as our greatest satisfaction and our greatest fulfillment, even in the longing and in the now and the not yet of our faith. God has provided richly for us in Christ and has met our deepest spiritual hunger.